The day will come when a federal judge tells the Secretary of the Treasury that he has violated the law. But today, it was Congresswoman Alma Adams' turn to tell Secretary Mnuchin that he violated the law by preventing the IRS from handing over Donald Trump's tax returns in compliance with a legal demand by the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, who is the only person in the House of Representatives who is legally empowered to examine tax returns and demand tax returns. Congresswoman Adams began with this.
Do you know how many times President Trump has publicly offered to release his tax returns?
I do not.
Well, we should have something on the screen. He's personally offered to give us a glimpse of his tax returns at least 24 times. It was scrolling on the screen, and it'll probably be back up. It was April 19th, 2011, in an interview when he first said that. And he said that if President Obama would release his birth certificate, then he'd release his tax reforms. But, of course, President Obama did do what he said he'd do, and the president did not do what he said he'd do. So do you think the American people have a right to know what's in those tax reforms?
No, I don't. Presidents are not required to, and the American public knew that he didn't release them before they voted for him. So that's
all right. I'm reclaiming my time now.
Congresswoman Adams had to constantly reclaim her time in order to stop the secretary from filling up that time with empty answers. Then she zeroed in on Mnuchin illegally blocking the IRS from handing over the Trump tax returns to the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee.
Are you aware then that by denying this that you are in direct violation of the law?
No, absolutely not. I have been advised I am not violating the law. I never would have done anything that violated the law, and quite the contrary. I've been advised that had I turned them over, I would be violating the law.
All right, let me move on, sir.
And today, the Secretary of the Treasury, in that hearing, refused to answer a very, very simple yes or no question.
Have you told the IRS not to respond to Chairman Neal's request?
The IRS independently, the chairman independently wrote a letter concurring with my position.
Yeah, can you give me a yes or no? Have you?
You repeat the question?
Have you told the IRS not to respond to the request?
Again, I just said the IRS independently wrote a letter concurring.
Sir, okay, let me reclaim my time. Can you give me a yes or no?
I don't understand.
All right, okay, you will not. You won't give me a yes or no.
It was a very simple question. Did you tell the IRS commissioner not to respond to Chairman Neal's request for the Trump tax returns? When Trump cabinet members are afraid of the truth in a yes or no answer, they ask to repeat the question. I've shown you them doing that before. And then they just keep running away from the answer. I've shown you that before. We've seen it with Attorney General William Barr. We've seen him do that. Now we've seen Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin doing that. Secretary Mnuchin did not say no. And that leaves only one logical possibility. Yes, he did tell the IRS commissioner not to respond to Chairman Neal's demand. And that is another instance of the Treasury Secretary violating the law. Joining us now is William Lowrance, a tax attorney in private practice who was the trial attorney in the office of the Chief Counsel of the Internal Revenue Service for 29 years. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. It is really valuable for us to have your experience on these issues tonight. What did you make of that final point where the Treasury Secretary refused the simple yes or no question of did you direct the IRS commissioner to not release those tax returns?
Well, I think it's fairly clear, as you said. It probably leaves a yes as an answer. The commissioner, IRS commissioner, is required under the code section dealing with this disclosure to the tax writing committees, shall turn over return information when requested by the committee or tax writing committee's chairman. It says shall turn it over. It doesn't say may turn it over or take your time in turning it over or anything of that nature. It's very direct. It's very, pointed in saying you will turn over the information. Now, the commissioner should have turned it over, and it's done all the time in the IRS. They oftentimes request returns, and it gets turned over. Obviously, the commissioner in this case must have been communicated not to turn it over. And I would suspect maybe the secretary is the one that did that, or one of his assistants or underlings.
In your experience, when these requests came to the IRS commissioner, as they have in the past, was there ever any pause over it? Did the commissioner ever turn to the counsel and say, should I obey this law?
I'm not aware of anything like that. No, I as a matter of fact, received oftentimes letters from the secretary's office requesting some legal information or something of that nature, which is passed on to me as the attorney to write an answer and send it back up the to the managerial and level, to the chief counsel, and then back to the secretary. And the returns most often, and I've never known of any not to be turned over, because they've abided by that particular code section.
And there's a leaked memo this week, a draft memo from the IRS from someone in there, possibly in the counsel's office, saying basically exactly what you're saying, that this is very simple black and white law. There is no choice.
Well, that's true. Of course, they're going to take the position that there has to be some underlying legislative purpose, or it's executive privilege, or there's a privacy policy involved. Well, all of those particular grounds, I guess, would have I think, a very, not a very good chance in court if those sort of defenses are put forth in a trial.
William Lowrance, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. You're welcome.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.